Welcome in to the Email Design Podcast, your home for all things email design, development, and marketing. I'm your host for today, Kevin Mandeville, and joining me on the program, we have a guest co-host and sort of guest interviewer who you should be familiar with at this point on the podcast, our very own research director here at Litmus. We have Chad White coming into the program. Chad, welcome in.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So today we want to sort of touch more on the marketing end of things and dive into some email deliverability. So recently, Litmus and specifically you as the author came out with the 2017 State of Email Deliverability Report. And we really want to dive into all of your findings and research of this report. It's another fantastic report, by the way. You can go to litmus.com/lp/state-of-email-deliverability-2017. You can always Google Litmus State of Email Deliverability. You'll find it right up at the first result. So, and you actually have quite a good bit of knowledge around spam. I mean, I just finished reading your book, Email Marketing Rules, which you can go to emailmarketingrules.com or search for it on Amazon. That was, probably my favorite section of the book was the whole spam and deliverability and talking about sort of permission marketing and getting users, to not think that you're spamming them, that you have your permission. Especially somebody like me, I'm more of a designer developer persona who I don't really know as much about this realm of the email world. So, I'm probably one of those people who sounds like a web developer talking about email for this. So this is why I'm very excited to dive into this report today. So where would you like to start?
Yeah, so I would start by saying that deliverability is a little bit of arcane sort of dark arts, like in the same way that from my point of view, email coding is a little bit of dark arts. Yeah. Like I couldn't even begin to fathom like trying to do the things that you do, Kevin. So definitely one of those areas that is special and requires a lot of special knowledge. So first of all, thank you to everyone who completed our State of Email survey. More than 3,500 of you completed that survey. We'll have our next survey coming up in December and into January. So please keep an eye out for that. And you can find all of our State of Email research reports at litmus.com/stateofemail. A little bit easier to find.
Nice. Yeah.
But so we've used all the information you gave us. We're trying to deliver that back to you in the form of great insights, and this report is just one of the many things that we've done. So in terms of email deliverability, where I want to start is just looking at how prevalent it is to be blocked and blacklisted. I think there is this perception that bad people get blacklisted and bad people get blocked. And our research definitely kind of challenges that notion quite a lot. Now, people who described their email programs as being successful were slightly less likely, about 19% less likely, to say that they had been blocked in the last year, one or more times. But those people who described their email programs as successful were almost exactly the same, had exactly the same likelihood of being blacklisted as folks who acknowledge that their programs were average or unsuccessful. So there's a little bit of some vagaries here in terms of who gets blacklisted. It's not always because of doing really bad stuff. Sometimes it's neglect. Sometimes it's programs that got away from you or pulling up the wrong list. Like I've heard of people like accidentally like sending a mass email to like their suppression list instead of to their active mailing list. And it's things like that can sometimes get you in trouble, or a bad in-store email acquisition program where you get a bunch of handwritten email addresses and you start mailing out to those and you get tons of hard bounces, or you get heaven forbid some sort of a typo spam trap, and that ends up getting you blacklisted. So sometimes these are not outwardly nefarious things that cause you to get blacklisted. So hopefully, one of the big findings is that, if this happens to you, it's not necessarily because you are bad. You're in sort of good company. This is a little bit of table stakes for being in email marketing, is that at some point, this is probably going to happen to you. Now, all of that said, our research definitely shows that there are things that if you do them, you are more likely to get blocked or blacklisted. And at the same time, there are activities that you can do that are less likely to get you blocked and blacklisted. And obviously, we'll talk a lot about those things.
Yeah. So I'd love to dive into the subscriber acquisition sources. I thought this was an interesting section. So talk to us sort of about the different ways people are trying to acquire subscribers, and then sort of what you found in the data around just sort of the different number of sources that brands or companies or organizations were using and how that varied on their success.
Yeah, so this for me was probably the most fascinating section. I hadn't previously seen any other research into this, sort of trying to connect the lines between subscriber acquisition sources and the effect that it has on deliverability. I hadn't seen that before. It's possible there's some research out there, but I hadn't seen it. So I found this to be really fascinating. We asked about 20 different subscriber acquisition sources, from like the most common being a sign-up form on your homepage or on your mobile app. And we had like nearly 3/4 of marketers saying that their company used that as an acquisition method. And that was by far the number one. And then it falls off pretty rapidly from there as people are using subscriber acquisition sources that make the most sense for their particular business. And we did try to highlight some of those differences. We showed which sources were most used by B2C brands and which ones were most used by nonprofits and B2B brands. And they definitely did differ, which talks a little bit about, what the strategies of those different companies are and what their strengths are and how they, tend to engage with folks. So definitely you want to be looking at the sources that kind of make the most sense for your business. You don't want to look at the list that we include in this report and say, I need to I'm not doing that method. I've got to do that. Definitely don't think of it that way. But this definitely should give you some ideas. Now, there were a couple of interesting findings here. Is that number one, the number of sources that you use definitely signifies success to a degree. On average, people are using about 4.5 subscriber acquisition sources. The median was 4. But we did find that successful companies tended to be more in that sort of 5 to 7 range. So, take those 4 acquisition sources you're using now, make sure that you're fully optimizing those and that those 4 are good ones for your particular brand. But there's definitely some statistical reason to think that you might want to seriously consider adding 1 or 2 more to bring in more volume. That said, definitely some sources are way more problematic than others. We tried to look at the 5 most problematic sources, the sources where the folks who have been blocked or blacklisted were using those sources at a much higher rate than people who hadn't been blocked or blacklisted. And that 5 was kind of interesting, although not totally unsurprising. So purchase email lists is on that list.
Yep.
And that is not a surprise, I don't think, to anybody. We've been talking about it forever. Please don't buy email lists. There's tons of reasons why you don't want to do that. The list quality tends to be really bad, unless you're paying a ton of money. And even then, you just simply can't buy permission. So please don't buy email lists. But that was the number 3 most problematic on our list. The number 1 was email list rental, which I gotta say was super confusing for me. When I first saw that, I thought that the numbers were wrong or that I had miscalculated something. Folks who were blacklisted were more than twice as likely to have done email list rental than folks who had not been blacklisted. And I actually had to do a ton of digging to try to figure out why the heck that was the case. And in fact, we had to do some additional research to figure out why that was the case. And so you might have seen that we did a poll on the Litmus blog where we asked about people's email list rental experiences. And we used that to confirm my suspicion that email list rental doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. in that in many cases, providers are using the term list rental to kind of be cover for some of these shady practices, like buying lists. And in fact, in many cases, folks that were doing list rental, what they thought was list rental, were getting the list from the broker or the person they were buying from. That is buying a list.
Yeah.
That is not rental.
Not a rental.
Not
buying.
a rental.
Buying, not renting.
So I guess just to be clear, like the standard list rental is where someone, usually a media company or something, has a list of subscribers that they're emailing on a regular basis. When you do a list rental from them, you create copy, you create an email message, your CTA and all your messaging, and you give that content to the company you're renting the list from. They send that content on your behalf to their subscribers, ideally under their sender name and with their unsubscribe on it. That is how it should work.
Right.
And our polling indicated that was not happening often.
Yeah, and if it's coming from them with their, authenticated everything, properly sending to subscribers that they have permission from, that you should be avoiding, exactly what the data shows. So that's an interesting finding. And then I also thought it was interesting, just to circle back on sort of the blacklisted and blocked, how companies or organizations who are using more acquisition sourcers did experience a higher uptick in being blacklisted or blocked.
Yeah, and that kind of makes sense because the more and more sources you're using, like you're exhausting the ones that are good, and you're stretching and stretching and stretching, and you're doing more and more of these sort of marginalized acquisition practices. So that makes a lot of sense, but there did seem to be pretty good evidence that like somewhere in that 5 to 7 acquisition source zone, like is ideal. Like that's where you can sort of optimize list growth while also minimizing or keeping in check at least the dangers of being blocked or blacklisted. So again, everyone's sort of around that like 4.5 territory right now. So really we're talking for the most part of like trying to add 1, maybe 2 more additional acquisition sources and see what those are. Again, hopefully our report can give you, some ideas about what might make sense for your particular brand.
Absolutely. So let's dive into some of the permission practices. And I know for you, having talked to you just beforehand, maybe one of the most puzzling or interesting findings around double opt-in versus single opt-in.
Yeah, so the double opt-in purists out there will be very disappointed to hear that the benefits of double opt-in that we found in our research was relatively small. There was definitely a quality benefit, but it was not like amazing, and it was not super compelling. So my point of view has always been that you really shouldn't be using all one or all the other. That really you need to cater your confirmation practices to the source. What is the context in which they're opting in? Was it an active or a passive, sign up? And that should inform whether or not you're actively or passively confirming that sign up, with a double opt-in practice. So that was a little bit surprising that the quality benefits of double opt-in were not very compelling. The other thing that honestly we don't talk about in the report because I don't know how to rectify it, that was very confusing, was that the people who seemed to have the most problems were actually the people who were using a mix of single and double opt-in. And there I have no clue why that is the case. That is absolutely the thing that I would advise people to do, would be to use a mix, to use them appropriately in various scenarios. Use double opt-in in these, with these acquisition sources, and use single with these other acquisition sources, like with checkout. When you're signing up people via checkout, use single. You don't need to use double in those instances. But if you're doing a sweepstakes or Facebook, tab, sign up, like maybe double opt-in is better in those situations. So my advice has always been to sort of match, those confirmation up with risk. But folks who were using a mix definitely saw higher blocks and more blacklistings. Not tremendously, but it was more, and I have no idea why.
Yeah,
So.
I wonder if that leads to more sophistication, and maybe it's not just a byproduct of double or single opt-in that you're using, but other methods, other people managing different parts of the program. I wonder if there's some other type of factors that could be going into the process there that's leading into them seeing, lesser the deliverability results.
Yeah, the only thing I can really think of is that it's operational. And we do see this sometimes with previous research that I've done into double opt-in, is that double opt-in have higher failure rates on the operations side, just because it's another step. And so it's another step where businesses can see that process break down and fail. So it's possible that folks who are using a mix don't have good operations there, that maybe where they think they're using double opt-in, maybe they're sometimes not. And so maybe there's mixed messaging. So that's the only thing I can really think of that would cause it. But again, all in all, a mix is what I would I would advise people to use.
Yeah. So transitioning to talk about authentication, this was probably one of the more disappointing parts of the report, to see a lack of adoption for a lot of these best practices, which have been around for quite a while, in talking about SPF, DKIM, and DMARC.
Yeah, so DMARC is relatively new.
Yeah, DMARC's relatively new, I should say. But
DKIM and SPF, they have been around for 10 plus years, folks. So yeah, that's super sad for me to see that only 2/3 of brands are using those. Really no excuse. For the most part, authentication is sort of a one and done kind of thing. You set it up and you're largely done. And for the most part, you only need to worry about it again anytime you're launching new domains or changing your ESP or doing some kind of really big, thing that you would want to look at this stuff again. So I really don't know why adoption isn't higher. For me, it's really disappointing, especially considering all the news that we've had in recent years about hacking and spoofing and spearphishing. And the other thing that I think is even more difficult for me to fathom is that we looked at usage among small companies and larger companies, companies with fewer than 500 employees and companies with more than 500 employees. And the smaller companies actually had higher authentication rates, which baffled me, because larger companies are much more likely to get spoofed than smaller companies are. At least that's my understanding. So it seems like there are some large companies that are kind of engaging in risky behavior by not authenticating their email. Now that said, DMARC used by less than 50% of brands. That's also kind of frightening. So all you people who have not, gotten on board with DKIM and SPF, do that. And at the same time, make sure you do DMARC. I know that there is a little bit of lingering confusion out there. Some people think that if you do SPF, you don't have to do anything else. That is not true. You need all three. This is not I get to choose which thing I do. You need all three of them. And I know that that's been, I think, confusion from sort of day one, back when SPF and DKIM were first being launched. They were being launched by sort of competing entities, and brands felt like they had to choose. And then it became clear you needed to do both. And now there's DMARC. You need to do all three of them.
Yeah. And obviously, people who used them said their programs were more successful. SPF and DKIM had a slight increase, but DMARC had, it was about almost a 20% type of increase for saying that they were more successful using that. So, I mean, definitely get on that. And we do have additional DMARC sort of blog post as well that points out to you from the report to help you with that as well.
And there might be some visibility issues here. I wonder if, because it is a little bit of a one and done kind of thing, that people think that I also wonder if some of our data is actually completely accurate just from a reporting standpoint. I do wonder if some of the people who said that, oh yeah, we're authenticated, may not actually be. For those people who use Litmus and who are on a plus or higher plan, you have access to spam testing. Spam testing from Litmus will tell you whether or not your emails are authenticated on all three of these standards. So check that out just to kind of gut check yourself, because email is complicated and we can't remember everything, and sometimes we think we've done something or we did it a long time ago, and again, maybe you've changed ESPs or you've launched new domains, and sometimes these things do break. So if you are using Litmus Plus and above, check out spam testing and check your authentication to make sure it's still good.
Yeah, there's a free trial offer too in the report just for spam, and we recently overhauled it completely, so it gives you a ton of more insight into the descriptions of the issues that you're having. There's over 20 plus filters now. It's just a lot more detailed than it was before. So maybe even if you've used it in the past, definitely check it out. It's sort of had a complete overhaul, total makeover. And
it's a new product.
Yeah, it's a new product. So definitely check it out. So let's talk about the list unsubscribe and encryption usage and sort of what the trends we saw here.
Yeah, so these are sort of, this is definitely like in the periphery of deliverability. These factors are definitely sort of like, I don't want to call them sort of tertiary, but they're definitely on the outer rings of the deliverability world. As far as we know, list subscribe does not affect directly your deliverability. It is the status quo. Pretty much if you are using any kind of legit ESP, they are enabling that by default for you. That is good. Do not disable that. You want to keep that. We've written on the blog about why that's a good reason, but essentially, you don't want to make it hard for people to opt out. And some people are mistrustful of the unsubscribe links that brands supply. So having that sort of neutral, third-party inbox-provided unsubscribe link is a good thing. Sometimes that's more trusted, and you want people. I know it's hard for marketers here, but you want people to unsubscribe if they want to unsubscribe.
Right.
And this makes it easy for them to do that, to take themselves off the list before they get frustrated and decide to use the report spam button instead, which is very common behavior when people can't figure out how to unsubscribe or they don't trust the unsubscribe link that you're providing. They will turn to that report spam button. You don't want that to happen because that hurts your deliverability. Whereas the list unsubscribe, header does not. It's a completely deliverability neutral option, and that's why we're talking about it, because you definitely want people to use that versus report spam.
Yeah, deliverability issues are worse than unsubscribes, right? And I mean, oftentimes with unsubscribes, it's just going to help your list hygiene and your overall health of your email list. So I wouldn't fight against that, like you said. But it's also one of those things too, where I think you see the trend now of just a lot more email clients are starting to build in those features right in the UI, because the unsubscribe links are becoming so hard to find in some emails now.
For sure, which is unfortunate. So I think the rise of the list unsubscribe header is further evidence that we as email marketers are not doing a great job in this regard. Like anytime we see inbox providers adding this kind of functionality, it's proof that we have, as an industry, have sort of fallen down. And the fact that this functionality has come along just shows that we have made it too difficult for people to find the unsubscribe link. So if your unsubscribe link is buried in giant blocks of administrative text at the bottom of your email in light gray text, it's probably an opportunity for you to revisit that and make that easy. Again, unsubscribes do not hurt your deliverability. Spam complaints do, and also disengagement does. Google and pretty much all the major inbox providers use engagement-based filtering, and that's another reason why you want people to unsubscribe rather than to mark you as spam or just stay on and not engage with your emails. If people want to be off your list, you kind of want them to be off the list. So that'll help your deliverability kind of all the way around. And then in terms of encryption, this is also another one of these sort of marginal deliverability items. Thus far, encryption is not affecting deliverability as far as anybody knows. But I would not be surprised if at some point it does. I think it is most definitely a trust factor, kind of like list unsubscribe. If you disable that and people see that they're not able to easily unsubscribe, I think that is becoming a trust factor and will probably increase the likelihood that someone will report that email as spam if they see that that isn't showing up. Same thing with encryption. I think this is an especially high risk for financial services companies, insurance companies. Gmail, which is a very popular email client, indicates whether or not the messages have been encrypted using opportunistic TLS, sort of in-flight encryption. So it's encrypted, from point A to point B, so that anybody who intercepts that message in transit isn't going to be able to read it. But Gmail has a little padlock, and it's green when it detects encryption, and it's red and unlocked when there isn't. And if I was a financial services company or an insurance company or anything having to do with money of any fashion, I would not want a little red unlock padlock right next to my sender name. That's a trust factor. That could get you, that could cause people to report that email as spam or to certainly ignore it. And you don't want that to happen.
And so Gmail, obviously, security is sort of their number one thing that they're concerned about as a product. We've learned this. I mean, this is why it took so long to even support media queries. Do you think other providers are going to follow suit in Gmail in terms of surfacing that type of information in the UI?
It seems inevitable. I mean, Gmail has pioneered all kinds of things, like tabs, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
And I still remember people freaking out over a priority inbox, but then freaking out again over tabs. But now tabs are a part of a lot of different inbox UXs. So I think it's just a matter of time. I mean, Google and Gmail are just really influential. And frankly, I'm a big proponent of encryption because of other trends in email marketing, such as personalization. That's more, personally identifiable information, or certainly valuable information that's being included in emails for the purpose of serving subscribers. So we should totally do that. But we did this big report, Email Marketing in 2020, where we asked a bunch of experts about the future of email marketing. And this idea of hyper-personalized email was a very prevalent idea. And if that is true, which I think it is, then encryption is how you mitigate some of the risks of that. Because if you're sending highly personalized emails, you don't want that stuff to get picked up in transit and used to spearfish your subscribers and your customers. So yeah, I hope that encryption becomes the status quo. And frankly, that's on top of all the stuff we've seen in the American political scene in terms of email hackings and unencrypted emails and even faulty authentication and stuff that we've seen just in the political scene. So hopefully that's sort of a reminder in terms of like the sort of public pain that email, like done poorly, has caused politicians. Like brands should not want to have that kind of same thing happen to them.
So let's get into talking about list hygiene, spam filter testing. So interesting thing here around email address verification, only 29% said that they actually verified email addresses. That felt a little low to me.
Yeah, these are pretty easy solutions to put into place. But I mean, essentially what these things do is they check email addresses to kind of screen out typos, like common typos, to make sure that like the domains that are being put in are real ones. They're not like expired ones, or again, like ones that have typos in them, so they're just wrong. You can also use it to screen out like role email addresses, so like sales@Litmus. Like you don't want that on your email list. You don't want email addresses that are shared by tons and tons of people. That tends not to go well. So yeah, a little bit surprising that that's not higher. These solutions, again, kind of have been around for a while. They're not super expensive. If you if email is important to you and you have a lot of new incoming addresses, especially if you have like open forms. Now, if you have like really tightly controlled, like where you have people registering, like they're verified customers already, then maybe email address verification is not as useful for you. So maybe some of these like financial services companies that tend to be very focused on customers and not a lot of like prospecting. Maybe for them, maybe they don't need it, but yeah, I think there's definitely an opportunity there for more people to maybe learn about those tools and see if they make sense for them.
Yeah, Bright Verify and Fresh Address were the most popular services there. Bounce management, it was good to see about 82% are relying on their ESP to do that for them. Almost 17% are removing them manually. Do you recommend that?
I do not. I do not. So there were a handful of things in the report where there was extremely high correlation between a behavior and being blacklisted and blocked. And manually removing bounces was one of those behaviors that had a very high correlation to having bad things happen to you. And it kind of makes sense because we, as marketers, are always looking for reasons to not get rid of an email address. We're always looking for that excuse. So manually removing them just puts us in that position to use our judgment, and our judgment is bad, really bad when it comes to removing bounces. So don't do that. Now I didn't crunch the numbers on this, but I wonder if some of this is from people using homegrown in-house email systems. So in that case, if you have I think it's close to 10% of brands have some form of in-house platform that they use, most likely for transactional. A lot of cases, people are not relying just on an in-house created platform to send their emails. In many cases, they seem to be using it just for transactional emails, which it's fine. I think you have a lot of options now to use, much more robust systems that are designed just for transactional emails or just for automated emails. So I'd encourage you to check that out rather than actually operating your own. I'm not really sure, unless you're Amazon, why the heck you would want to operate your own ESP even for transactional emails, but it is not super uncommon. If that is the case, please use a third-party bounce management system. The risks there were way lower and essentially in line with people using the bounce management provided by their ESP. So don't remove bounces manually.
And then about 58% are running a spam filter test before every send. It's good to see the majority, but everybody should be testing before every send. So definitely get into the habit of that. And taking a look at the top spam filters used, Litmus came in at number 1. I say we probably have a little bit of audience bias.
A little bit of audience bias. But great to see. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Obviously, it seems everybody's just using their native ESP functionality largely. And then you sort of have Spam, Assassin, and Return Path as the other key players in the space, which was interesting.
Yeah, definitely. One of the common themes across all of our research is that ESPs really do provide a lot of functionality to their users. And as someone who's worked at Salesforce and ExactTarget and Responses, I can tell you that we as ESPs get very frustrated sometimes that our customers don't use more of the functionality that we provide. I believe that research has shown that most ESP customers use less than 50% of the functionality of the platform that they've spent, quite a bit of money on. So check your platform, make sure you understand what kinds of tools it has available to you. Obviously, we'd love for you to use Litmus spam testing, which again, we've totally revamped and it's pretty amazing. But if nothing else, make sure that you're using the functionality provided by your ESP. And in many cases, we actually see people using their ESP provided functionality and then augmenting it with other third-party systems. So that's, again, not sort of an either-or choice. But again, if nothing else, please use the functionality in your ESP. So
let's get into inactivity management. And I thought some of these topics that you talked about in your book, especially, I thought were very enlightening for somebody like me. So again, check out Email Marketing Rules as well as this report. But we can get into sort of re-engagement campaigns, win-back campaigns. And I want to sort of clarify the difference for those who don't know. Could you sort of explain what's a re-engagement campaign and what's a win-back campaign and the differences between the two?
Sure. Yeah, and there's definitely pretty widespread confusion here about the differences between these two things. So a re-engagement campaign is aimed at engaging an inactive subscriber. A win-back campaign is aimed at engaging an inactive customer. So re-engagement campaigns, the goal is to get a subscriber who hasn't been engaging with your emails to start engaging again, and that essentially means either an open or a click. A win-back campaign, the goal is to get that customer buying something again, just get them to transact. Very different goals, different problems. You could have someone who is a very engaged subscriber who hasn't converted as a customer in some time, and so a win-back campaign is the right approach for them. You could also have people who are, transacting not through email, but aren't engaging with the email, and therefore a re-engagement campaign would make a lot of sense for them. So these are different problems with different solutions. Sometimes I see people, brands trying to get folks who are disengaged on email to get them to transact. And not that that's wrong, but it's not necessarily the right approach. I feel like in many cases, the solution with a win-back campaign is you're giving them like a good deal, really your richest offer, trying to get them to buy again. Will that necessarily get someone to click and re-engage? Possibly, but I feel like you're not getting at root cause. If someone's not engaging with your emails, it's because the content isn't relevant to them. And so I feel like a much better re-engagement campaign is some kind of a survey, trying to get them to engage with your preference center, to kind of change either the cadence that you're sending them emails, or to, more importantly, the content that's in those emails. Maybe there's different topics that you offer that you to send messages about. So maybe their interests have changed, and therefore the stuff you were sending them just doesn't work anymore. So if you can figure out the new things that they're interested in, either via some type of survey, preference update, some kind of progressive profiling that gives you sort of in-market data to send them a segmented message that's very tailored to their interests, that's, I think, a way smarter way to deal with disengaged subscribers.
In re-engagements, we saw people using those campaigns, about 47% said yes, most likely to be B2C brands out of that group. 59% would send a re-engagement campaign within 9 months, 27% in the 10 to 15 month range. And I thought what was interesting was that marketers who sent it after 9 months described their programs as being more successful. So not being afraid to even engage at a much later date.
Yeah, I mean, the risks here is that the longer someone is disengaged, the harder it becomes to kind of get them back. That habit of being disengaged gets more and more firm. It becomes concrete after a while. So the folks who are waiting, 24 plus months to try and re-engage someone, that's someone who you've fallen so far out of their routine that it's really hard to get back get back into their routine and get top of mind with those guys again. So yeah, definitely, in some cases, there are some brands, if they're high frequency brands, if you are a daily deal retailer and you're sending emails every day, maybe you only tolerate a month or two or maybe 3 tops of disengagement before you're trying to re-engage in some major way, because your frequency is so high that it amps up your deliverability risks around your engagement metrics slipping low.
Yeah. And we saw in the win-back campaigns, it was ironic to see that the breakdown for when they send was almost identical to the re-engagement campaigns. Obviously, probably a high correlation between people doing both. But yeah, win-back about 60%, less than 9 months, 27%, 10 to 15 month range. But people describe their campaigns as more successful when sending less than 9 months for win-backs. And 41%, a little bit less, were doing win-back campaigns overall. B2C brands were still the highest there, much more likely than B2B brands.
Yeah, and the fact that those are similar might speak to some of that confusion that we talked about before about confusing re-engagement and win-back campaigns. But also, it might be that the win-back campaigns naturally have a little bit of a longer delay because it depends on what you're selling, right? If you're selling something, if you're selling fashion, or anything that's kind of consumable, you're probably going to have a much lower tolerance for inactive customers because if someone goes, a year without buying something from you, it probably means they're buying it from somebody else, and that's a problem. But if you're a computer seller or something that's more durable, where the turnover cycle of that product is a year or 2 or 3 or whatever, then your win back cycle there is probably going to be a little bit longer to kind of match that product life cycle. But for most brands, and certainly a lot of B2C brands, you're selling something that's less durable, and therefore you're going to want to tolerate quite a bit less. But that may be a little bit of what we're seeing in the data.
45% of brands are removing inactive subscribers. Obviously, those who did this said their programs were more successful. This should be an active thing that you do to keep your list clean.
Oh, please, God, please remove your inactive subscribers. In my book, I talk about 2 years being like the longest you should keep anybody that hasn't opened or clicked. And I still feel pretty good about that number. And frankly, a lot of brands in practice will remove chronically inactive subscribers way sooner than that. And I think that's smart. I know that this is a little bit of one of those tough issues for a lot of marketers. I got the subscriber. They told me I could email them. They told me. And so I'm going to do that. I'm going to do what they told me to do. When they stop engaging with you for a super long period of time, you have to acknowledge that maybe they changed their mind and they're just not telling you in an active way. So that disengagement that you're seeing that's really prolonged think of that as a passive unsubscribe. And and also you absolutely just have to believe that the inbox providers are looking at engagement metrics. Gmail for sure is putting a lot of stress on engagement-based filtering. And frankly, Yahoo and AOL and the other guys are too, but Gmail for sure is seeing that. And for anybody who's ever been blacklisted or had blocks at Gmail, you know that purging inactive subscribers is the way that you get back into Gmail's good graces. So why wait to get in trouble? Take care of those guys on an ongoing basis so you don't get blocked in the middle of the holiday season or whatever the heck your peak season is. Don't wait for that to go nuclear on you.
Yeah.
Take care of that, as part of having a clean list. And there's this perception that there's going to be some miracle with these folks who haven't opened or clicked in 2 years, and they're going to come back and they're going to spend $1 gazillion with you and make your business successful. That just doesn't happen.
Newsflash. It's over. It's time to break up. They're just not into you. Okay, time to move on.
The risks there are just so high and the reward possibilities are just so low.
Yeah. And re-permissioning campaigns, 42% said yes. This is obviously becoming a bigger issue with Castle and GDPR nowadays. So you definitely need to, sort of keep tabs on all of those things.
For sure.
So talking and getting into analytics and deliverability, blah, 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 monitoring, 61% saying that they use some type of analytics tools, which is good. And obviously, a lot of those are coming from Google Analytics, big provider there. We're seeing Litmus Analytics up at the top and Adobe Omniture, which makes a ton of sense, but I thought that was interesting. Wouldn't have popped to the top of my head. And a lot of those are heavily B2C more than B2B as well, using that, which was interesting. I thought the B2B numbers would be a little bit more, like the B2B and B2C numbers would be a little bit more even. I think we saw a lot more of the B2C skewed for a lot of these.
Yeah, and I think it's because B2C brands tend to be higher volume users.
Yeah.
Like they have more subscribers and they send more frequently. So I think that's why we see them as being sort of ahead of the curve. So that makes a ton of sense to me. But B2B companies should definitely kind of look and try to mirror some of the stuff that the B2C folks are doing. They're kind of leading the way. But I think the big thing here with analytics is that number one, like more analytics, good. Like, the more you know, the better off you are. And really, like at a fundamental level, like if you have visibility, you can take action and react. If you don't have visibility, you can't. It's just that simple. And we've done other research where we've seen that folks who use Litmus email previews, they're able to see the things that are wrong with their email designs and fix them. And the folks who don't, they spend a lot less time building their emails. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But all these kinds of mistakes and bad brand experiences that they're delivering to their subscribers, like make them pay for it in the end. So you can't fix what you can't see, and analytics and deliverability monitoring allow you to see the things that you're going to want to fix in the same way that Litmus email previews allow you to see the broken things in your emails so you can fix them.
Yeah. And on the deliverability side, almost 80% said they are monitoring deliverability, and there are really two key forms people are using. Most, 75%, using their native ESP for that, and then 22% using return path, and then it drops all the way to like 3% after that. So mainly two players, your own ESP or return path, who are sort of monitoring deliverability on that end.
Yeah, so it's off the shelf or third party, and we are seeing considerable among successful programs. We are seeing a pretty significant trend in those companies going outside of the ESP provided tools. So we saw that with spam testing, we saw that with deliverability monitoring, we saw that with analytics. It's great that your ESP provides these things for you. Often that is not all you should do, or certainly for successful companies, they are finding that that's not all that they need, and they're reaching out and getting third-party solutions to augment the stuff that they have in-house. So, your analytics from your ESP may be great, but, for instance, Litmus email analytics can show you other things that you can't get probably from your ESP. And there's like a lot of cases like that where we're seeing successful companies augmenting the stuff that they already get from their ESP.
All right. Well, this has been fascinating stuff to review, Chad. Thanks so much for coming here on the podcast, diving into this, and I'm sure we're going to have you back for future reports that will be coming out to dive into. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And so again, you can just Google Litmus State of Email Deliverability 2017 or litmus.com/LP/State of Email Deliverability 2017 with dashes in between all those after the LP to check out the full report, get a download, and yeah, check out the free, spam testing for Litmus, all that good stuff. So that's going to do it for this edition of the podcast. Reminder, you can go to emaildesignpodcast.com. Full show notes, links, past episodes. We'll have the links to the email deliverability report there. Subscribe on SoundCloud, YouTube, iTunes. Tweet along with the hashtag emaildesignpodcast. And free 14-day trial of Litmus. Just go to litmus.com/giftcard, input the coupon code podcast. And hey, check out Chad's book, emailmarketingrules.com. There's a whole great section on spam and permissioning and deliverability. I really enjoyed it, so check it out.